You know, there's a specific kind of silence that happens when a billionaire decides to be cruel. It's not quiet. It's heavy, like the air suddenly got sucked out of the room and replaced with judgment. And that was exactly the atmosphere in the penthouse of the Millennium Tower on a Tuesday night that started like any other gala and ended with the world turning upside down. It was the kind of party where the champagne cost more than my car, and the people drinking it laughed a little too loud, checking each other's wrists to see whose watch cost more. But in the center of the room, standing on imported Italian marble, Alistair Sterling, a man who owned half the skyline and treated people like traffic cones, was pointing a manicured finger at a 10-year-old boy in a stained t-shirt. "Open the safe," Sterling boomed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings, "or your mother packs her bags and leaves this building tonight. And trust me, Elena, nobody in this city will hire you when I'm done." Elena, the maid who had spent the last 8 years invisible in the background of Sterling's life, stepped forward, her hands shaking so bad she had to clasp them together, begging him, "Mr. Sterling, please. He's just a child. He's waiting for my shift to end." He didn't mean to be seen, but Sterling didn't even look at her because to him, she wasn't really there. She was just an appliance that had malfunctioned. "I don't take excuses from the help," Sterling sneered, swirling his scotch, looking around at his guests with a grin that said, "Watch this. 50 of the richest people in New York are watching. Elena, 50 cameras are rolling, and your son. Well, let's see if he's got a brain in that head or if he's destined to scrub floors just like you." He turned back to the boy, Leo, who was standing there looking small and terrified, clutching a beat-up library book like a shield. "5 minutes. Kid," Sterling laughed, a cold, sharp sound. "There's $100 million in diamonds inside this vault. The finest Swiss engineering on the planet, if you can count high enough to crack it. Maybe I'll give you $1 for the bus ride home." The crowd laughed, that nervous, ugly laughter of people who are glad they aren't the target. And Elena's knees buckled, tears streaming down her face as she whispered for her son to just apologize, to just look down, to just survive. But Leo didn't look down. He walked up to the massive steel face of the vault, placed his small, callous hand against the cold metal, and for a second, he just closed his eyes and smiled. But to understand why a 10-year-old boy would smile in the face of a monster like Alistair Sterling, you have to understand that this moment wasn't an accident. It was a collision course that started years ago in a cramped basement apartment in the Bronx where the only thing plentiful was dust and determination. 30 minutes before the bet, Leo wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just trying to be invisible, sitting on a crate in the service hallway, smelling the bleach and the garbage, reading a book called The Mechanics of Modern Security. That was so overdue the librarian had probably put a warrant out for it. Leo was the kind of kid who took apart toasters not to break them, but to see why they toasted. The kind of kid who found calm in gears and springs because, unlike people, machines made sense if a machine broke. There was a reason, a loose screw, a worn belt. But if people broke, it was just messy. His mom, Elena, had taught him the rules of their life early. Don't make noise. Don't touch anything, and never, ever let them think you're smart. Because smart kids from the wrong neighborhood scare rich people. So Leo learned to hide his brilliance behind silence. He spent his afternoons at the public library or watching YouTube videos on an old crack tablet, diving into forums about lockpicking, about acoustic resonance in tumblers, about the flaws in German engineering versus Swiss precision, absorbing it all like a sponge because it was the one thing he could control in a world where he had no power. He knew about Alistair Sterling's vault not because he had seen it, but because he had obsessed over it online. The Titan 4000, a beast of a safe that was supposed to be uncrackable, an impenetrable box of ego that Sterling bragged about in every interview. But Leo knew a secret about the Titan 4000 that even Sterling didn't know. It had a harmonic flaw, a specific vibration that happened when the tumblers aligned, a hum that you didn't need a stethoscope to hear if you knew exactly what to listen for, if you knew the song of the metal. That night, Leo was just waiting for his mom to finish her shift, hungry and tired, when a waiter tripped, a tray of hors d'oeuvres went flying, and a glob of expensive caviar landed on Leo's sneaker. drawing the eye of Alistair Sterling, who was prowling the hallway looking for someone to yell at. "What is this rat doing in my hallway?" Sterling had shouted, looming over the boy. And when Eleanor rushed over, apologizing, trying to wipe the caviar off the floor with her own apron, Sterling decided he wanted entertainment. He wanted to assert dominance. He wanted to break something that couldn't fight back. He dragged them both into the main party, announcing to the room that the help was breeding rats in his corridors. And that's when the challenge happened. A drunk, arrogant power play born of the belief that Leo was nothing, that he was stupid. Leo stepped back, turned to the billionaire, and said in a voice that didn't shake, "You owe my mom an apology." Sterling froze, his glass halfway to his mouth. "Excuse me?" "You said 5 minutes," Leo said, pointing at the massive handle. "It's been 43 seconds. And then, with the casual energy of a kid opening a refrigerator to get a juice box, Leo reached up, grabbed the heavy chrome handle, and pulled. The vault door, weighing 2 tons, swung open on silent, well-oiled hinges, revealing the inside of the uncrackable Titan 4000 to the entire room. And the collective gasp that went through the crowd sucked the oxygen right out of the penthouse. But here's the thing, there weren't diamonds in there. There was no Star of the East or whatever flashy rock Sterling had bragged about. Instead, the shelves were stacked floor to ceiling with plain cardboard boxes, overflowing with manila folders, hard drives, and stacks of cash that looked very, very off-the-dash books. Sterling dropped his glass. It shattered on the marble, shards flying everywhere. But nobody looked down because they were staring at the open safe, and more importantly, at the top document in the nearest box, which had slid out and was now lying on the floor, clearly visible to the front row of guests. It was a ledger, and right at the top, in bold red ink, was the name of the charity that half the people in the room had donated millions to earlier that night, next to a column labeled offshore diversion. Leo didn't know he was exposing a crime. He just wanted to win the bet. But as the silence stretched out, turning from shock to horror, a woman in a red dress, Sterling's own business partner, walked forward, her face pale, and picked up the paper. "Alistair," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. This is the pension fund. This is the orphanage fund. Where's the money, Alistair?" Sterling scrambled, his arrogance replaced by pure, unadulterated panic, lunging forward. "Don't touch that. That's private property. Security. Get them out of here." But the security guards, burly men who had been treated just as badly as Elena for years, didn't move a muscle. They just stood there, arms crossed, watching the ship sink. "You stole it," the woman screamed, throwing the ledger at him. "You stole from all of us." The room erupted into chaos, people shouting, phones recording now with a very different purpose, accusations flying like shrapnel. And in the middle of the storm stood Leo, holding his library book, looking at Sterling, with eyes that were too old for his face. "You said you'd fire my mom," Leo said, his voice cutting through the noise. "But I don't think you can fire anyone anymore." Sterling turned on them, cornered and feral, looking for a victim. "You little brat," he hissed, advancing on Leo. "You rigged it. You broke it. I'll ruin you. I'll make sure your mother rots in a cell for enough." It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Elena stepped between Sterling and her son, and she wasn't the terrified Maid anymore. She was a mother guarding her cub, and she was 10 feet tall. "You will not speak to him," Elena said, her voice steady and hard as iron. "You will not look at him. You will not come near him. I own you." Sterling spattered, veins bulging in his neck. "I can deport you. You can do nothing," Elena said, reaching into her pocket and pulling out her phone, which was already on a call. "Because the FBI has been trying to get a warrant for that safe for 6 months, Mr. Sterling. They just needed someone to open the door. And guess what? We're live." The elevator doors pinged open behind them, and it wasn't room service. It was a dozen federal agents in windbreakers, guns drawn, moving with the efficiency of a tidal wave. Leo looked up at his mom, eyes wide. "You called them. I knew he was dirty, Mio," she whispered, smoothing his hair. "I just didn't know where he kept the dirt. You found it." As the agents swarmed Sterling, forcing him to his knees on the marble floor he loved so much, the guests, parted like the Red Sea, watching the king of New York get cuffed and read his rights, sputtering threats that sounded emptier by the second. Sterling looked back at Leo one last time, hate burning in his eyes. "You're nothing." He spat. "You're a glitch." Leo just shrugged. "And you're a bad investment." The aftermath was the kind of media storm that defines a decade. Hashtags like hashtag the boy who cracked it and hashtag Sterling exposed trended for weeks. The footage of the 28-second safe cracking was viewed 100 million times, and legal analysts had a field day with the contents of that vault, which turned out to prove the biggest Ponzi scheme since Madoff. But the real story, the one that mattered, happened after the cameras went away. When the dust settled on the Sterling scandal, the world expected Leo and Elena to take a victory lap, to go on talk shows, to cash in on the 15 minutes of fame that comes from taking down a billionaire. But that's not who they were. They were builders, not boasters. The investigation revealed that Sterling had stolen over $300 million from charities, pension funds, and even his own staff's retirement accounts. Every maid, every doorman, every driver in that building had been robbed blind for years. And the contents of that safe were the only map to getting it back. Because Leo opened that door, restitution checks started going out 3 months later. Ruth from housekeeping got her life savings back. Samuel the driver could finally afford his daughter's tuition. And the local animal shelter Sterling had supposedly bankrupted suddenly found itself fully funded again. Eleanor received a check for back wages and damages that was enough to move them out of the basement and into a real apartment with windows that let in the sun. But she didn't stop there. She took the settlement money and started her own business, The Clean Break, a cooperative run by domestic workers for domestic workers, ensuring fair pay and dignity for the people who keep the city running. She never scrubbed another floor on her knees again unless it was her own. And she made sure every contract she signed had a clause that said respect was non-negotiable. And Leo? Well, Leo tried to go back to being invisible, but the world had seen his magic. A week after the arrest, a package arrived at their new apartment. No return address. Just a heavy box containing a brand new, state-of-the-art lockpicking set and a letter from the head of engineering. Admit, "Dear Leo," it read, "we saw the video. The way you approached that safe wasn't just luck. It was intuitive engineering. Most people look at a lock and see a barrier. You looked at it and saw a conversation. When you're ready, there's a full scholarship waiting for you. Until then, keep asking how things work." Leo framed the letter, but he didn't let it go to his head. Instead, he started a club at the local community center called the Open Door, teaching kids from the neighborhood how to fix things: bikes, radios, old computers, showing them that just because something is broken doesn't mean it's trash. A lesson he learned from his own life. 6 months later, Leo and Elena were walking past the Millennium Tower, which was now under new management. The name Sterling stripped from the facade and left as a faint scar on the stone. They stopped to look at the building where they used to enter through the service door, always looking down, always apologizing for taking up space. "You know," Elena said, squeezing Leo's hand, "he thought he was untouchable because he had money. He didn't realize that money makes you heavy, but truth makes you light." Leo looked up at her, grinning that gap-toothed grin. He also didn't know about the harmonic resonance of the Titan 4000. "That was a rookie mistake, Mom." Elena laughed, a sound that was free and full and light. "Yeah, baby, a rookie mistake. But the story doesn't end there, because the universe has a funny way of circling back." 5 years later, Leo was 15, standing on a stage giving a TED Talk about the physics of security, demonstrating how he cracked the uncrackable safe, not to brag, but to make a point about accessibility and gatekeeping. "We build walls," Leo told the audience, holding up a simple padlock. "We build safes. We build systems designed to keep people out, to tell them they don't belong, to tell them they aren't smart enough or rich enough to see what's inside. But every lock has a key, and sometimes the key isn't a piece of metal. Sometimes the key is just someone who refuses to be intimidated by the door." In the audience, sitting in the front row, was a man in a cheap suit looking older than his years. Watching with a mixture of bitterness and awe, it was Alistair Sterling, out on parole, working as a consultant because nobody would trust him with money anymore. He watched the boy he had called a rat command the attention of the world's brightest minds, and for the first time in his miserable life, he understood that he had lost the bet long before the safe door opened. He lost it the moment he decided that a person's worth was determined by their bank account. After the talk, Sterling tried to approach Leo, maybe to apologize, maybe to beg for relevance. But he was stopped by a wall of security, not hired goons, but the friends Leo had made, the community he had built, the people who protected him not because he paid them, but because they loved him. Leo saw him, paused, and gave a small nod, not of forgiveness, but of acknowledgement, a silent message that said, "I see you, but you don't scare me anymore." Sterling turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd, finally invisible. So, here's the thing about this story: it's not really about a safe. It's about the danger of underestimation. Sterling looked at a maid and saw a servant. He looked at her son and saw a nuisance. He didn't see the years of resilience, the quiet study, the brilliance honed in the dark. He forgot the most important rule of power: the people you step on are the ones who are learning exactly how to tie your shoes together. Leo Foster proved that you don't need a golden key to open a door. You just need to listen to the world when everyone else is too busy shouting. So I have a question for you guys watching this. Have you ever been in a room where someone made you feel small? Have you ever had a boss, a teacher, or some arrogant jerk tell you that you didn't belong, that you weren't cut out for it? What did you do? Did you shrink, or did you crack the safe? Let me know in the comments below. Tell me your story of being underestimated and how you proved them wrong. I read every single one. And if you like this story, if you believe that talent comes from the most unexpected places and that bullies eventually get what's coming to them, hit that like button, share this with someone who needs a boost, and subscribe for more stories about the underdogs winning. Because remember, just because you're quiet doesn't mean you aren't the most dangerous person in the room. Stay curious, stay brave, and keep opening those doors. See you in the next one.